Hiya, I'm Bruce Fummey. This is the third in my series of 3 videos on the Crofters, land wars in Skye. If you haven't seen the first 2, then click on the white tab above to go back to the start. If you've already seen them, then this is the video for you. Now, if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click on the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of the screen at any time during this video. Also, you can find more information on books, locations and how to support the channel in the description below. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Okay, so a quick summary. So far, for the last 100 years, people in Skye have been leaving. Pushed or pulled to the urban areas or to the Americas by opportunity, hunger, enticement or enforcement. Those that are left are suffering under the weight of increased rents and landlords commandeering common land and renting it to sheep farmers for a healthy profit. Even William Gladstone, the UK Prime Minister of the day, said that the Crofters had been surreptitiously deprived of their common land over 2 centuries. People had started to revolt, with rent strikes and refusal to cooperate with court orders. Landlords threatened evictions. There had been flashpoints at the Battle of the Braes and with the Glendale Martyrs. The government had set up a royal commission. It was called the Napier Commission. And that had concluded that the landowning classes had behaved appallingly. The recommendation? That folks paying more than £6 a year in rent should be given the security of a 30-year lease, and those paying less should be helped to move to Australia or Canada. Now, all the Crofters of Glendale that we covered in the last episode were below that £6 threshold. As a result, nothing happened. Plus ça change. C'est pour toi, Maurice, que j'ai mis un peu de français dedans. Je t'en prie. What had happened, though, was that Skye had become a beacon and a spark for other places. There were rent strikes on Lewis. John Macpherson, the most famous of our Glendale martyrs, had gone on a speaking tour. A land league was established. I've talked about Braes and Glendale, but I haven't mentioned Muir. This is the beautiful Uig Bay. And here in Muir had been where the first of the rent strikes had taken place 7 years earlier. Now they were on rent strike again. The reasons were the same as at other times. The reasons were the same as at other locations. The land, livelihoods and liberty of crofters being squeezed by the interests of large-scale sheep farmers. The response to the rent strikes. 10 policemen were sent here to Uig to deal with it. Now, if you've been paying attention in the last 2 videos, you know the script. They were greeted by a huge crowd of crofters who drove them back to Portree. Now, in his office, William Ivory, the Sheriff of Inverness, do I hear booing and hissing at this point? Anyway, in his office, he'd been keeping a fully laden camel waiting for a straw, and sure enough, the ignominy of the police retreat in Muir weighed heavy. As far as he was concerned, there was a Hebridean island that had effectively declared an independent socialist state. Now, I know that's an anachronism in this time, but you get my point. Of course, as far as the Crofters were concerned, the police weren't officers of the law. They were a paramilitary force enforcing the interests of the landed class, who had surreptitiously stolen their common grazing. Here's a question. If you and I and the rest of the community share communal land, then whilst you're getting on with tending the land and growing crops, I make up a set of rules that say that the land's mine, and then I write your rules on a piece of paper and call it law. Is that legal? If so, who says? I think the answer might be the guy that's got the gunboats. Now, some people get caught up in imagining that every injustice in Scotland was English. Let me disabuse you of that. The sympathies of much of the country and the Liberal government in London were with the Crofters. The UK Home Secretary of the day, William Harcourt, said, "These notices of removal seem to me to be a source of irritation which is not to be justified at all. That there exists in these districts extreme poverty, in some parts borne for many years with extraordinary patience, I think everyone who's acquainted with these districts must be aware. Some people say, oh, the remedy for this is emigration. Well, sir, in my opinion, emigration is a very poor remedy indeed. I have myself no sympathy with a policy which improves a country by getting rid of its people. To my mind, it's the policy of despair. It's like the old medical treatment of Sangrado, who cured all diseases by bloodletting. But after all, blood is the life of the body, and the people are the life of the country. I, at all events, do not accept the policy of making a solitude and calling it political economy. Strong words. But he sent the gunboats anyway. On the 16th of November 1884, the gunboat Forester, the HMS Assistance and the Lochiel arrived out there in Portree Bay with 350 Redcoat Marines, 100 battle-ready seamen and scores of police. John Macpherson, the Glendale martyr, crofter leader and orator, the man who had been the first to address the Napier Commission on his return to Skye from prison. He'd been running back and forward between Glendale, Kilmuir and Portree. And having persuaded the crofters not to meet force with force, he may have avoided a bloodbath. So when the Redcoats and the gunboats arrived, it was a land-in to make a show of force rather than a punitive invasion. Another gunboat, hilariously named the Banter, arrived, and the ship sailed from Portree to Uig to Dunvegan to Colpost, depositing Redcoats, Marines and police to start a 7-month occupation of this island renowned for peace, tranquility and fairies. As troops came up to Glendale after landing at Colpost down the hill there, a crowd of 600 had gathered for an open-air meeting of the Land League in this natural amphitheatre behind me. John Macpherson was giving a rousing speech. The troops gripped their rifles as the Sheriff of Inverness caressed the Riot Act in his pocket. Their triggers would have impact, but it's his finger that pulled them. As John Macpherson announced to the crowd that they would never give in no matter what forces were sent against them, a cheer went up. Junior soldiers might have started, but their senior officer held them calm. Several massacres in British military history had happened with misunderstandings such as this. "25 Marines and 6 police were left here at Hamara Lodge to enforce the occupation, and the rest returned to the ship to be deposited at their own locations throughout the island. Now, during the 7-month occupation, there were no incidents of violence. In fact, the locals to some extent prospered in selling milk and eggs to the troops. But the Sheriff of Inverness used the cover of the occupation to go round the island arresting those that he saw as involved in the rent strikes, contempt of court orders and such like, and bringing them to Portree for judgment. Now I say there were no incidents. In one celebrated incident in Glendale here, John Macpherson came face to face with Sheriff Ivory out arresting. And his remonstrations led to an outburst where the imperious Sheriff of Inverness claimed that he just had to give the order and the troops would fire. Macpherson heard that. The troops heard it. The journalists heard it. The nation heard it. Pretty much all the people arrested failed to even get to trial through lack of evidence. And then, on the 24th of June 1885, the last of the troops left Skye. The tranquil island of Skye had changed. But something more important had changed. You see, in 1884, the Liberal government passed the Voting Reform Act, which changed the franchise. And now in Invernessshire, the numbers of voters had gone from 1,851 to 9,330. In the next election, Crofters candidates stood in 5 Highland seats and were elected in 4. The Crofters Holding Scotland Act was passed in June 1886. It wasn't the end of the road. It wasn't the start of the road. It wasn't perfect. It was just a step along the way. As were the Battle of the Braes, the Glendale Martyrs and the 1884 military occupation of Skye. Given that many essential workers can't afford houses here because they're bought up for holiday lets, how far along that road are we? I mean, Doc is going to be a lamb ally. Cheery and Rasta.